Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, October 17th, 2024. Israel confirms that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas and the mastermind of the October 7th deadly attack on Israel, has been killed by an Israeli military operation in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls it an important moment in the war. An independent panel investigating the first attempt at assassination of former President Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, concludes the Secret Service as an agency requires fundamental reform to carry out its mission, and without that reform, another Butler can and will happen again. We'll talk about the report with Associated Press Homeland Security reporter Rebecca Santana. Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee this year, is asked about his plans for heavy tariffs on imports, including cars, in an interview with podcaster Patrick Bet-David. Donald Trump calls the word tariff in this podcast the most beautiful word in the dictionary. While Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen tells the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City sweeping untargeted tariffs would raise prices for American families and make our businesses less competitive. President Joe Biden celebrates a student loan cancellation program milestone. For public workers, the relief is now to more than 1 million Americans. And the International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says the global wave of inflation is in retreat, but she says do not celebrate yet. High prices, war, and country debt may mean the future is not so bright. Story from the New York Times. The Israeli military confirmed on Thursday that Yahya Sinwar, the powerful and elusive militant leader who's been the number one target for Israel since the beginning of the war, had been killed in battle. Mr. Sinwar was viewed as the architect of the brutal October 7th attack on Israel that set off the 13-month war that has plunged the Gaza Strip into a humanitarian crisis and began a wider conflict that now includes the fighting in Lebanon. After a firefight in Gaza on Wednesday with Hamas forces, Israeli soldiers retrieved a body that appeared to be that of Mr. Sinwar. A sample of his DNA was tested to confirm his identity, according to an Israeli official with knowledge of the matter. The police in Israel said they had also used Mr. Sinwar's dental records and fingerprints, both of which were on file for identification purposes. Reporting from the New York Times. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reacted in a video statement.
Yahya Sinwar prepared his last-minute preparations for the massacre of the 7th of October. I'm standing here today to tell you that he has been killed. He who killed and caused the worst massacre ever since the Holocaust. He was killed by our soldiers, our heroic soldiers, and we have finished our accounts with him, but the mission ahead of us has not been completed. Dear families of the hostages, this is a very important moment in the war. We will continue with all our strength until all your dearly beloved hostages that we love so much will be brought home. It is our commitment. It is a supreme commitment. Sinwar really destroyed your lives, and I'm telling all of you in the Gaza. But he was hiding in a little dark cave, and he was killed when he was running away from our soldiers. This is the end of the evil rule of the Hamas, and I'm telling you in a clear-cut manner, Hamas will no longer rule the Gaza Strip. This is the day after that. Now, it is your opportunity to be freed of his tyranny. And I'm telling you now, all your leaders will be eliminated. So just remember that. But those who will bring back our hostages, they will be saved. But those who will hurt our hostages, believe me, their days are numbered.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a video statement, the interpretation provided by Sky News. Washington Post has an article aboard Air Force One. President Joe Biden said Thursday that the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar by Israeli troops is a good day for Israel, for the United States, and for the world, and called it an opportunity to free Israeli hostages held by Hamas and the end of the year-long war in Gaza. Biden, in a statement, compared it to the feeling in the U.S. after the killing of al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, who was responsible for the September 11, 2001 attacks, saying the killing of the mastermind of the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel proves once again that no terrorist anywhere in the world can escape justice, no matter how long it takes. That was from the Washington Post. President Biden flying from Washington, D.C. to Germany, and when he landed, he spoke to reporters at the airport for a minute.
Good day for the world. I called Netanyahu to congratulate him getting Sinwar. He had a lot of blood in his hands. American blood, Israeli blood, and others. And I told him that we were really pleased with his action. And further that now's the time to move on. Move toward a ceasefire in Gaza. Make sure that we move in the direction that we're going to be in a position to make things better for the whole world. It's time for this war to end and bring these hostages home. So that's what we're ready to do. That's what we're going to do. And I'm sending Tony Blinken to Israel. I guess he's going in 4 days. 4 or 5 days. And he's going. I talked with Judy about that. We're going to work out what is the day after that. How do we secure Gaza and move on? Thank you very much.
Do you feel more confident, sir, about the ceasefire?
I do. Do you have a sense of when he will end the war, sir?
President Joe Biden speaking to reporters as he landed in Germany after flying from Washington, D.C. He is there to meet with the leaders of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, made a statement about the death of Yahya Sinwar while she was campaigning today in Milwaukee.
Today, Israel confirmed that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, is dead, and justice has been served. And the United States, Israel, and the entire world are better off as a result. Sinwar was responsible for the killing of thousands of innocent people, including the victims of October 7 and hostages killed in Gaza. He had American blood on his hands. Today, I can only hope that the families of the victims of Hamas feel a sense and measure of relief. Sinwar was the mastermind of October 7, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. A terrorist attack that killed 1,200 innocent people and included horrific sexual violence and more than 250 hostages taken into Gaza, including 7 Americans, living and deceased, who remain in captivity. A terrorist attack that triggered a devastating war in Gaza, a war that has led to unconscionable suffering of many innocent Palestinians and greater instability throughout the Middle East. In the past year, American special operations and intelligence personnel have worked closely with their Israeli counterparts to locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leaders. And I commend their work. And I will say, to any terrorist who kills Americans, threatens the American people, or threatens our troops or our interests, know this: we will always bring you to justice. Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated, and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin, without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all. I thank you all.
Is the U.S. asking Israel to end the war now, Madam Vice President? Will you be asking Israel to end the war?
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, today in Milwaukee. As mentioned earlier, the news of the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar came as President Biden was flying from Washington, D.C. to Germany for meetings with the leaders of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. On that flight, the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan took reporters' questions.
You kind of implied that Sinwar had been an obstacle to hostage release and ceasefire. How big an obstacle is that, and does this give you additional hope now of a ceasefire and possibly a hostage release? How should we process this?
I didn't just imply it, I stated it explicitly. At various points along the way, Sinwar was more interested in causing mayhem and chaos and death than in actually trying to achieve a ceasefire and hostage deal. And we repeatedly saw moments where it was him in particular who stood in the way of making progress towards the ceasefire and hostage deal. Now, there were other obstacles too along the way, but he was certainly a critical one. And yes, I think his removal from the battlefield does present an opportunity to find a way forward that gets the hostages home, brings the war to an end, brings us to a day after. That's something we're going to have to talk about with our Israeli counterparts. Of course, there are still other Hamas actors who need to be brought to justice, and there are hostages, including Americans, being held by terrorists. We're going to have to deal with all of that, but we believe there is a renewed opportunity right now that we would like to seize.
Yeah. Do you assess this as being the cutting off of the head of the Hydra, or what's your assessment of Hamas's capabilities from now on? Is there going to be a mop-up, and what would you recommend the Israelis do?
Sinwar was a critical figure operationally, militarily, and politically for Hamas. He had, in fact, consolidated control of both the political and military wing under his singular leadership in recent weeks and months. And so this is a very significant event. But what exactly it means for the future of Hamas as an organization, it's early days yet. We will have to see. What we do know is that the broad military structure, the battalions of Hamas, have been systematically dismantled. We do know that Hamas does not pose the kind of threat to Israel that it posed on October 7th or anything close to it. We also know that there are still Hamas terrorists wielding guns and holding hostages and harboring a desire to continue to attack Israel and attack others. And so we're going to have to sort through all of that. But this is an incredibly significant blow to Hamas. It is the removal of someone who, as I said, was unique in the consolidation of the control of the Hamas apparatus under his command. And now we will have to work to ensure that his death actually does deal the kind of long-term blow to Hamas that all of us would like to see.
Jake Sullivan is the White House National Security Advisor, holding the news conference on Air Force One, flying with President Biden from Washington, D.C. to Germany. Story from TheHill.com. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, on Thursday marked the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar by calling him the embodiment of evil, adding his life was marked by hatred for all that is good in the world. Johnson said in a post on the social platform X, his death brings hope for all those who seek to live in freedom and relief to Israelis he has sought to oppress. And from NBC News, in the wake of Sinwar's death, the U.S. will push harder to end the war in Gaza with its regional partners and chart a new path forward, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said today. Blinken released a statement following the Hamas leader's killing that said Sinwar had rebuffed efforts for a hostage return deal in past months. The State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller took questions about the death at today's State Department news conference.
Does the leadership in Qatar, after the secretary spoke to them, do you suspect or do you know if they know who Hamas's chosen successor is going to be?
I don't think anyone can say with any certainty. Hamas has a process that they go through in these situations. We saw them go through that process after the death of Hanea. I could only expect that they will go through that process again. I don't think anyone can predict. People can always speculate, of course, about who the next leader of Hamas will be, but I don't think anyone can predict with any degree of certainty. But what we would hope, is that whoever the next leader of Hamas is, he will look at what has happened over the past year and look at the suffering that Hamas's actions have brought upon the Palestinian people who they aim to represent, whose cause they aim to advance, and will look and decide that they ought to pursue a different path forward. They ought to pursue a path that isn't one of death and destruction and chaos and harm to Israeli civilians and harm to Palestinian civilians, but one that the United States has presented, that Egypt has presented, that Qatar has presented, that other countries in the region and around the world have presented and endorsed. And so that's what we'll be pushing for.
Are you communicating that to indirectly, to, I guess, the remaining leadership there? That are you communicating that is the United States' hope and what you're pushing for?
So I'm not going to speak about any communications that our mediators will have. We always let them speak to those. We are communicating with Qatar. We'll be communicating with other partners in the region. I think that our position is fairly well known. Now, of course, we don't know who the person at the other end of the phone is going to be. We don't know who will be making decisions for Hamas now. What we do know is that the person who had been the chief obstacle to moving forward with an end of the war is now fortuitously no longer with us.
Last question. So I know that you hope this is a big opportunity for ceasefire negotiations and a deal and return of the hostages, but a little more macro, what about for a two-state solution? How do you think this?
Of course, that is the goal that we want to see. That has been our policy for some time. We ultimately want to see a path forward that allows Palestinians in Gaza to rebuild their lives, to rebuild their neighborhoods, to have security, to have Palestinian-led governance that they choose, not that it's imposed upon them by the outside world, to live free from the grip of a brutal terrorist organization as opposed to how they have been living in Gaza for the past couple of decades, and ultimately an independent Palestinian state where Gaza is reunited with the West Bank.
But that's just like a lot of hope and no chance, or have you seen any, indications that this could create an opening for that?
I do want to just step back, and this, I think, will be an answer I give to a lot of questions like that today, which is we are just hours after a very significant event. I think we're going to have to watch and see how things settle before people can make predictions about how the days, weeks, and months ahead will play out. One thing we do know for certain is that the world is a better place with Sinwar gone from it, and it gives us an opportunity that we didn't have as long as he still called the shots for Hamas. Now, what that will mean, we'll have to wait and see in the days ahead.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his daily news conference at the State Department in Washington. Story from CNN. The U.S. carried out a round of strikes in Yemen against the Iran-backed Houthis on Wednesday evening, according to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, targeting 5 underground weapons storage facilities using B-2 stealth bombers. The facilities housed advanced conventional weapons used to target military and civilian vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. 3 U.S. defense officials told CNN following the attack. It marked the first time the U.S. has used the strategic stealth bomber to attack the Houthis in Yemen since the beginning of the U.S. campaign. The B-2 is a much larger platform than the fighter jets that have been used so far to target Houthi facilities and weapons, capable of carrying a far heavier load of bombs. That was the article from CNN. The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder was asked about this attack today.
B-2 use last night. Is there another aircraft that could have carried the munitions that the B-2 delivered? And if so, why use the B-2 instead of something that was closer to the region?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. First of all, in the U.S. military, we have, we have a wide range of aviation capability that can carry a wide assortment of munitions. The B-2 in particular, though, has a large payload, the ability to operate around the world. As I highlighted in the topper, we can strike anywhere, anytime. And in this particular strike, using its unique capability and ability to carry a large payload to deliver munitions that could penetrate and strike these deep underground facilities that were storing components that the Houthis have been using. Again, it also sends a very clear message that we can strike targets of this nature anytime, anywhere from around the world.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, Air Force Major General, at today's Pentagon News Conference. This is Washington Today. From Associated Press, an independent panel investigating the attempted assassination of Donald Trump at a Pennsylvania campaign rally says the Secret Service needs fundamental reform and new leadership, and that another Butler can and will happen again without major changes in how candidates are protected. We spoke with the AP Homeland Security reporter who wrote that article, Rebecca Santana.
Well, the 52-page report that was issued this morning was done by an independent panel of 4 people, and they came out pretty strongly saying that there needs to be fundamental reform at the agency and new leadership. And they also warned that without some fundamental reform, another Butler can and will happen again. One of the other interesting things about the report is that it said that the agency, that the Secret Service, needed to really think critically about how it carries out its mission, especially when it comes to protecting former President Donald Trump. The report said that there was almost an over-reliance on assigning personnel based on categories, whether that person was a former president, a candidate, a nominee, instead of really assessing the individualized risk that each person had and that they faced.
What specifically did they find the faults of the Secret Service in the Butler attempt?
But they talked a lot about some issues that were, some of which have already been known about what happened leading up to the rally and the day of the rally, specifically poor communications between the Secret Service and local and state authorities that were there on site. And then also, very importantly, that there was no plan for how to secure key buildings, including the building that the gunman eventually climbed on top of and fired his shots from.
Who is on this independent panel?
So the independent panel was made up of Janet Napolitano. She is the Homeland Security Secretary under President Barack Obama. Mark Philippe, who is the Deputy Attorney General under President George W. Bush. David Mitchell, who served in a number of different state and local enforcement roles in Maryland and Delaware. And then Francis Fragos Townsend, who is Bush's Assistant for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. So these are all former officials that were in various levels of government that were appointed to this, specifically to this panel, to oversee this investigation and to come up with an independent audit, if you will, of the situation that happened at Butler.
There are a number of other investigations happening of all the Donald Trump assassination attempts. How does this fit in, and what are the others?
Yes, there are a number of different investigations. Congress has been doing its own investigation into this, into the shooting, and there is the Secret Service also did its own investigation into its own staff, and then the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General is also carrying out a number of specific investigations into various aspects of July 13th.
Today's report does make recommended changes to the Secret Service. We've seen public hearings and news conferences where they're talking about the changes that have been made and are planned to be made. Where are we in that process?
Well, the Secret Service has said that they have made a number of changes, and they are working with Congress to see about getting more funding for other things that they would like to implement. The panel recommended a number of different things, including new leadership in the organization. Specifically, they recommended leadership from outside the agency. The report didn't say specifically that anyone should be fired, though. They also called for some more specifics about how events like these should be carried out, saying that they needed to have a unified command post at all large events. They had to have overhead surveillance for all outdoor events, and that security plans would have to specifically say how they plan to mitigate line-of-sight concerns out to 1,000 yards, and specifically spell out who is in charge at these events, because that was another issue that they outlined, that it was confusing at times who ultimately had control.
Rebecca Santana, Homeland Security reporter with the Associated Press. You can find her articles at apnews.com and on X at RuskiGal. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Story from Fox News. Former President Trump is set to attend and address the 79th Alfred E. Smith Memorial Foundation dinner on Thursday evening for the bipartisan political event that typically adds a bit of levity to the campaign trail each presidential election cycle, while simultaneously raising donations for women and children in need. This year's Al Smith dinner, however, is set to be a bit different from previous years, as Vice President Kamala Harris is skipping the in-person event and sending a pre-recorded video to be broadcast to the audience instead. That was from Fox News. Donald Trump did an interview released today with podcaster Patrick Bet-David, and one of the topics was tariffs.
We do too much, price may go up. Because if we do make this in America and cash flow income is not going up, middle Americans may be like, I can't afford to do this. Yes, we'd love to have it made in America, but a regular person making $55,000, you can't afford this. So how do you balance and manage tariffs so the average person is not affected by it? Please.
But before I do that, so let me just say, already tariffs, because to me, I think it's the most beautiful word in the dictionary. More beautiful than love, more beautiful than any word I know, tariff. It will make our country extremely wealthy again, because right now we're poor, we're broke. It'll make our country wealthy again. And it's the most powerful word there is. Okay, so just by the mere mention of the fact that I am going to put 100 to 200% tariffs on every car coming out of that factory that you just put, that car plant that's being built, actually started and stopped. The fact that I mentioned it, I said to the man the other day, because I told him, this started, I want to see a great car plant. He's the best in the world at building them, the biggest. And he said, I'll have to take you to Mexico. I said, you got to be kidding. I want to see in the United States. He said, we don't build them in the United States. We build them in Mexico and China and all over, but not. That's because we're stupid, okay? And yet we sell them. All that product would be sold in the United States. So I said, are you building it now? Yes, we're just starting. This was a year ago, let's say. And it's the biggest in the world. I think he said 2 of them, actually, but the biggest in the world. Anyway, I hadn't seen him. He's a great guy. All he does is plants. If you said build an apartment, he wouldn't know how to build it. I mean, all he does, tremendous new big plants. I saw him the other day when I made a speech at the Detroit really economic summit. It was great, on cars. And I see him in the audience, and I see him afterwards, and I say, could I ask you, how is the big plants coming? Oh, they stopped construction. I said, really? They did? Why? Tell me why. Because they think you're going to be elected, and if you get elected, you're going to put 100% tariff or 200. You even said 200. They said if Trump gets elected, we're not going to spend billions of dollars building plants in Mexico. I saved Detroit, what's left of it. Don't forget, Detroit can make a great renaissance with me. With her, she doesn't even know what you and I are talking about stuff right now. She would have no idea what we're talking about. You get it really good.
Donald Trump, former president and Republican presidential nominee, on the Patrick Bet-David podcast. It was recorded Wednesday and posted today. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen also spoke about tariffs. She gave a speech today at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City, ahead of the IMF World Bank meetings next week.
But from the start of this administration, President Biden and Vice President Harris have also charted a new course for America's international economic policy. We've focused on stabilizing and strengthening relationships and working multilaterally, including because we believe that America's economic well-being depends on a global economy that's growing and secure. American businesses and families have a tremendous amount to gain from our connections to the global economy and from U.S. global economic leadership. We need to promote policies, investments, and institutions that support global growth, protect financial stability, and avoid economic instability. This includes tackling challenges like climate change, pandemics, and conflict and fragility that threaten to hold back global growth and will be high on the agenda at next week's meetings. Calls for walling America off with high tariffs on friends and competitors alike, or by treating even our closest allies as transactional partners, are deeply misguided. Sweeping, untargeted tariffs would raise prices for American families and make our businesses less competitive. And we cannot even hope to advance our economic and security interests, such as opposing Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, if we go it alone. But the issues we face today, from broken supply chains to climate change and global pandemic preparedness, to China's industrial overcapacity also mean we cannot simply draw from an old playbook.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen at the Council on Foreign Relations today in New York City. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank meetings will start next week in Washington, D.C. An article from Successful Farming magazine: United States corn and soybean farmers could lose billions of dollars in annual production value in the event of a potential new tariff-induced U.S.-China trade war, according to a new economic study commissioned by the American Soybean Association and the National Corn Growers Association. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, spoke about U.S.-China relations, including economic relations, at an event today in Washington held by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
It is a fact of our world right now that even after rising tensions between the U.S. and China, there's a degree of interdependence between the Chinese and the American economy. The exports come here. They are critical for the Chinese economy even now. We'll have a discussion about the technology piece in a second. As you think about the strategic economic picture and how both countries benefit from some degree of trade, but they also are actively thinking about diversifying supply chains, reducing dependence on each other, where's the responsible, thoughtful U.S. policymaker to go? How do we balance all that?
You know, the first thing I should say is we should always make sure we're doing what we can to strengthen the U.S. here at home. Our economy, we would want to do that even if there was not a China on the world scene, but it's especially important that we do that when you have this kind of global economic competition. So I have been a big supporter of the initiatives that we implemented in Congress with the Biden-Harris administration. Everything from the CHIPS and Science Act. We funded the CHIPS part. We really need to fully fund the science part. That R&D is important. The Inflation Reduction Act to really move forward in a clean energy economy. The infrastructure bill. So I do think first and foremost, before we talk about how we deal with exports of technology to China and those sorts of things, we first and foremost need to address critical issues here at home, including our education system. So that's my first cut. With respect to the next steps, I do think it's important to diversify our supply chains in key areas, right? Critical minerals, electric batteries. We don't want to become dependent here in America or among our allies on China, which for a long time, as you know, has cornered the sort of the minerals market and the processing market. We don't want to become dependent, obviously, on high-end chips. So I am in favor of the de-risking approach, not the decoupling approach. I don't think decoupling is realistic or in our interests. So that's my view generally in terms of how we approach this. Be strong at home and also make sure we de-risk when it comes to critical supply chains.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, interviewed by Mariano Florentino Cuellar, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace president, at the endowment in Washington, D.C. today. You can find the video of the event in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Friday nights, watch C-SPAN's 2024 Campaign Trail, a weekly roundup of C-SPAN's campaign coverage, providing a one-stop shop to discover what the candidates across the country are saying to voters, along with first-hand accounts from political reporters, updated poll numbers, fundraising data, and campaign ads. Watch C-SPAN's 2024 Campaign Trail, Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or download as a podcast on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or wherever you get your podcasts. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. Article from CNN: with less than 3 weeks before the November election, the Biden-Harris administration is reminding voters how it has delivered a historic amount of student debt relief, even as Republicans have challenged several of its efforts in court and balked at the costs. Another round of forgiveness was announced Thursday, bringing the total amount of student loan cancellation to more than $175 billion for nearly 5 million people since President Joe Biden took office. That's roughly equal to 11% of all outstanding federal student loan debt. More than 1 million of these student loan borrowers received debt relief through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which promises loan forgiveness to public sector workers like teachers and nurses after they've made 10 years of qualifying payments. That was from CNN. The announcement today from the White House was another $4.5 billion in student loan debt relief for over 60,000 borrowers. President Biden posted a video on X today showing him showing up, surprising a kindergarten teacher in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, with the news that her student loans have been forgiven.
Ready? Let's go see Kelly. Hey, Kel.
Stop it. It's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. By the way, you're $46,000 richer. I just forgave your debt. Done. Done, done, done. And you deserve it.
Oh, my God. My morning message on Monday is going to be crazy. Oh, my God.
The whole name? Okay, Kelly Beckford. I'm a kindergarten teacher of multilingual learners. I am a first-generation college student. I've been paying my student loans for 12 years now, and hopefully I'll be able to qualify for public service loan forgiveness soon. I'm waiting on my application to be approved.
How you doing?
Hi. I'm so much cooler than all teachers at my school. Can't believe you're here.
Of course I'm here. Come on.
This is so nuts.
Kids send me these notes and I frame them.
You're from Scranton, Pennsylvania?
Yep.
My favorite show is The Office.
All right.
You really forgave my student loans?
Hey, Neville, this is Joe Biden. You're $46,000 better off now. You just forgave me all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was the president.
Yeah, Junior, I swear.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Keep it going. Help us,
I
kids.
will, for sure. So grateful. My husband and I have been married for 12 years, and we've never gone on a honeymoon. Maybe we'll be able to afford one now. Oh, my God. Yeah, wild, crazy.
A video posted by President Biden today with a teacher in Rhode Island. New York Times writes President Biden has fallen far short of the sweeping $400 billion in loan cancellation for as many as 45 million borrowers he originally sought. But even as that has left some supporters disillusioned, he has provided far more debt forgiveness through a variety of smaller measures than any previous president. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre talked about this in a news conference on Air Force One.
Student loans, you talked about the PSLF $1 million, a huge achievement for those borrowers. What's your message for the other 40 million plus borrowers who've been caught up in a lot of legal limbo over the past 3 years?
I'll say this, I'm not going to speak to the legal components of this. There are legal matters that are happening, so they're ongoing, so I'm not going to speak to that. But I think what you can take away from what this president has tried to do, and Republicans have continued to block him in promising to give Americans a little bit of breathing room, to make sure that Americans who have borrows, who have loans, and are squeezed by those loans, are not able to, buy a home, start a family. The president was very attuned to that and very clear that he wanted to give them an opportunity to really, be able to start that life that they wanted. And so he's been trying to do that, even though he's been blocked, and Republicans have gotten away. I think you can see over certainly the past 6 months, the president continuing to try to take actions to make sure he kept his commitment to Americans who, again, need a little bit of breathing room. So, not going to speak to the legal matter, but I think this announcement today shows his commitment to public service workers, right? I talked about firefighters, nurses, I talked about police officers who put so much on the line, who give so much for everybody, for folks who need their assistance and their help, and wanted to give them that opportunity to really be able to move on economically in what they want to accomplish for themselves and for their family.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre holding a news conference on Air Force One as they all flew with President Biden from Washington, D.C. to Germany today. On Wall Street, the Dow up 161, NASDAQ up 6, S&P down 1. The head of the International Monetary Fund, writes The National, has refused to declare victory over inflation, even as the world's major economies have begun cutting interest rates, saying high prices and conflict in the Middle East pose a cautious outlook. Although central banks such as the U.S. Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank entered a new era of policy easing after ramping up rates in response to 2022's inflation surge, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said not to expect any victory parties during the IMF and World Bank annual meetings next week. That was the article from The National. Here's how the managing director started her curtain raiser speech today at the IMF headquarters in Washington.
The big global inflation wave is in retreat. A combination of resolute monetary policy action, easing supply chain constraints, and moderating food and energy prices is guiding us back in the direction of price stability. And this has been done without tipping the global economy into recession and large-scale job losses, something we saw during the pandemic and after past inflation episodes, and which many feared we would see again. But we didn't. Both in the US and Euro area labor markets, we see, just taking these two examples, we see cooling in an orderly manner. And let's pause and recognize this is a big achievement. Where did this resilience come from? Answer: from strong policy and institutional foundations built over time, and from international policy cooperation as countries learn to act fast and act together.
The IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva at the IMF in Washington, D.C. She went on to say that not all is rosy on the economic front.
Inflation rates may be falling, but the higher price level that we all feel in our wallets is here to stay. Families are hurting, people are angry. Advanced economies saw inflation rates at once-in-a-generation highs, and that memory is not going to be erased rapidly. So did many emerging market economies. But look at how bad the situation was for low-income countries. At the country level and at the level of individuals, inflation always hits the poor the hardest. Well, true, and even worse, we are in a difficult geopolitical environment. We are all very worried about the expanding conflict in the Middle East and its potential to destabilize regional economies and global oil and gas markets. Its humanitarian impact, alongside the prolonged wars in Ukraine and wars elsewhere, is heartbreaking, and it is harming confidence in the world economy. And on top of it all, this is happening at the time when our forecasts point to an unforgiving combination of low growth and high debt, a difficult future.
Kristalina Georgieva is Managing Director of the IMF International Monetary Fund, speaking at the IMF headquarters in Washington, D.C. today. Financial Times writes, the Managing Director's remarks ahead of next week's IMF and World Bank annual meetings come as global public debt heads to a record $100 trillion by the end of 2024. Borrowing surged during the early stages of the coronavirus outbreak as economies were locked down. Many governments, including those of the world's largest economies, are yet to bring spending under control. The IMF confirmed the world's two largest economies, the U.S. and China, were driving the global rise in findings published this week. But in prepared remarks, Georgieva also highlighted a frightening evolution in emerging and low-income countries as more government income is set aside to honor debt servicing commitments. That was the article from Financial Times. And finally, on Washington Today, retired Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer spoke at the University of Virginia Law School in Charlottesville about his judicial philosophy and competing ones, and how justices approach controversies before the High Court, and his new book, titled Reading the Constitution, Why I Chose Pragmatism, Not Textualism. At the end of the hour, Stephen Breyer said he was optimistic about the future of the United States. He told a story about the late Senator Ted Kennedy, Democrat of Massachusetts.
I tell them what I learned from Senator Kennedy. This particular thing, what he would tell his staff. He would say, don't worry about credit for things. He says, you succeeded something, plenty of credit to go around. You fail, who wants the credit? But he said, this is what you do. You're having trouble getting a bill passed or stopping a bill from passing, whatever it is, and there are people, maybe Republicans, maybe Democrats, but there are people, they disagree with you. Here's what you do. You do what John Stuart Mill, I think, said the same thing. You find someone who does disagree with you. You think that person is intelligent, and you sit down and you talk to them. Wait. Don't talk too much. Listen. Listen to what they say. And if you listen long enough, they will say something that you honestly agree with. And as soon as they say that thing you honestly agree with, you say, that's a very good point you made. Okay. Let's see if we can work with that. And then you try to work with it, and maybe you'll succeed. Succeed at what? If you get 30% of what you want, great, take it. Don't hold out for 100%, which you don't get, so all your followers say you're wonderful. No, take the 30%, and then you've gotten somewhere. And I saw him many times. The press would say when we're successful at something, Senator Kennedy, you did such a good job on that. And he would say, don't thank me, thank Orrin Hatch, thank the Republicans. They came up with the thing that allowed us to work together and to get whatever this thing was. Now, it isn't what I've just said that makes me optimistic. What makes me optimistic is the fact that they're not looking out the window. They're not. They're looking at what I'm saying. They're looking, and it's the look in their eyes in that 7th grade, where I can see they think we found something where we can be helpful. We found something that we really can do something, and we can try. And it's that 7th grade, the light in their eye, their desire, that makes me still pretty optimistic about the United States.
Retired Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer at the University of Virginia Law School in Charlottesville today. Story from CNN. The Supreme Court on Wednesday handed President Joe Biden a surprise victory as it allowed the Environmental Protection Agency to temporarily enforce its rules regulating planet-warming pollution from power plants. The justices denied the emergency request from more than 20 Republican state attorneys general and industry groups that asked for the new Biden power plant rules to be temporarily halted while a lower court challenge plays out. Story from CNN. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.